Nah, when I was seeing it, mate, but it literally looks like real life. Like they've got the voice tone of Andrew Human and the voice tone of Joe Rogan. And AI's got that advanced that it's like mimicking it. But I reckon it's going to get to a point, Jerome, where, what, like 10 years down the line, where you're not going to be able to tell what's real and what's not. And I don't really know where you go from there as someone who consumes content. Like, how do you know what's authentic and what's not? Because AI is going to get that advanced, mate, that it's all gonna look and sound real.
It's called deep faking, mate. That's the thing about it. It's getting quite dangerous because have you ever, when you go on Instagram and you see videos of like a deep faked politician, for example, Joe Biden, it will always have like a fact checker thing underneath it, sort of telling you whether it's real or fake or not. And I think that going into the future, that's just what's going to happen. Everything is just going to be so severely like double checked to make sure it's actually the real person talking. That's what I reckon.
It's just trusting the places to trust that deep fake. So if they do that check, do you trust the platform that you're on to know that's actually a deep fake or
Hell
not?
no.
Because like,
Hell
yeah,
no.
that's the problem, isn't it?
Hell no, bro. Hell no, man.
Yeah. So
Anyway, man, how are you, bro? Since I last saw you, like I've been following your content since I met you at the Mastermind in London last month, mate, and I've been very very enlightened, man. I feel me and you reason why I wanted to do this podcast with you is because I felt me and you genuinely shared the same sort of origin story, if you get what I mean, and the same sort of we're the same age as well, aren't we? You're 24, I'm 24, and we sort of just I sort of just felt like an immediate like respect straight away for you when I met you. And I think a lot of people at the mastermind did because they felt that raw sense of genuosity, which is increasingly getting lesser and less in the world, unfortunately.
yeah, Jerome, I've been good, mate, and it's that's like the
Yeah.
best compliment you can give me because it's something that like I've never been good at. Like I've never been good at being my authentic self, just because I've always had the barriers of my authentic self isn't good enough, that people aren't going to like me unless I put this persona on, or people aren't going to be friends with me if I do this. So like confidence has been like a real issue for me, and I don't know, since I had that meditation retreat, it really showed me that like the more I try to layer personalities and personas on top of who I am, the less like disconnected I am, the less disconnected I feel. And like it's just you don't feel you when you're trying to act someone else. So for like me now, a big thing is just like being vulnerable and trying to be my like truthful self. And I think when you can actually do that, it does allow you to connect with people. But it's not easy, mate. And I still find like times when I'm at work or when I'm socializing, I still try and act out a persona, which I think is natural for humans to do. But it's just like stripping that back and trying to like be your authentic self. But like I was interested in speaking to you, to Jerome, anyway, because like to me, you came across like very charismatic, and I always think when people have got charisma, there's always a bit of like I don't know, like mystery about someone. It's always interesting to see someone who
Ah,
like you perceive charismatic that you don't quite actually know what's going on, but they got a bit of mystery. So yeah, I was looking forward to this conversation,
it,
mate.
it's you know what that is, mate. In the same way you gave off that really raw, genuine expression, the way I've sort of learnt to talk throughout my life, it's sort of same as you, to be honest with you, mate. It's sort of a shell of massive anxiety when I was a child, and sort of becoming the person I am now took a very long time. And so because of that, because I've always been in the sort of self improvement game, especially since I was younger, I sort of actually had to learn how to communicate in a good way where most people don't. They don't learn how to speak. They just speak, if that makes sense. And but no, I learned quite properly how to actually use your voice and use your mannerisms to essentially build mystery. And I know that might sound really weird, but there is genuinely a way of communication that you just not everyone does, which will skyrocket your charisma levels. And that's generally just taking pauses in what you say, and when you say something, you say it with like an allure of mystery. You know, that's what I do at least.
It's also saying it with conviction as well. Like it's saying things like that's
Exactly.
actually. I find a lot of time when you hear people umming and ahhing a lot, and it could be for a couple of reasons, like they haven't got the vocabulary, or. But most of the time, it's that they're second
I
guessing
always um and
themselves,
ah,
and
mate.
yeah,
I still put ums and ahs into things, bro. Like it still
mate, I don't
happens.
notice it, Jerome. Like some people, it's
Do you
really
not?
notice it
I
with the
do.
like, and it. Nah, nah, it doesn't come across, mate. And I notice it with some people. They're like like, and it really shows that. maybe you're not assured with what you're saying or who you are. So sometimes it's like, speak with conviction, and like what you're trying to say is your truth at the moment. Just fucking say it, and however it gets
Exactly.
perceived is however it gets perceived.
Well, you know what they say. I've heard some people describe Donald Trump in this way. They say he is so confidently wrong. Now, I don't want to talk about politics, about whether Trump's right or wrong or not. But I've heard people who dislike him say Donald Trump is so confidently incorrect in what he says. Like, this man will say something that fact checkers will say is incorrect in every single way whatsoever, but says it with so much conviction that he believes that it is correct.
Yeah, I really know what you mean, and it comes across like he's correct as well, though.
Yeah.
But I think then you get deluded to the point where like he actually thinks he's right when he's not right, and like sometimes you can like delude yourself from reality and like be that confident and assured in yourself that you stop seeing what's in front of you. You kind of see your own rapt illusion of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's really weird, man, confidence, because I've always found it something that in certain areas, at least for myself, speaking for myself here, it comes more natural than in other areas. Like, we always think confidence is just it's the be all and end all. Well, not all the be all and end all, but it's just one thing. When in reality, you can be confident in one area of life and be completely shy in another area.
It's really frustrating how that doesn't carry over, though. I know is that
Yeah.
I get this so bad, mate. And most of the time for me,
You get
it's like, yeah, talking to women. So this used to be a big one. I'm getting more confident as I kind of grow up, and it's really trite. But as you get older, you stop caring what people think as much. But like as I'm getting older, I'm getting better at it. But I find like my
I've had
own
it with
confidence. My own confidence and my own charisma, it like shrinks when I'm around women for some reason, and like to a point where like I act different, and I don't know if that's just me like trying to play the different scenarios, but my own confidence in myself, I carry myself differently when I'm maybe like talking to a girl I'm attracted to, and but when I'm in like with a bunch of lads or I'm doing something like the podcast, I feel like with my shoulders, chest out, I'm like this. I'm very like authoritative with what I
Yeah.
say, so it doesn't always carry over
But
to
why?
like confidence, as you say, is like subjective.
Mm. But why do you think that though? Like, why do you think that in like one area you're not as confident as in you in another? Like, what's the reasoning going on? Do you think it's internal, or do you think it's because of the people you're talking to? Like, maybe you don't feel confident. Because I agree with you. I don't feel confident when I'm speaking to certain people either. And I've just sort of come to the conclusion that actually it's not me. It's when the reason why I don't appear confident to them is because genuinely I am not compatible with that person. And so for me to be my true self, they will just not like. And I know this, and so I will not be as confident. But if you immediately have that rapport with somebody, you can be your true self and your true character will shine.
Yeah, it's tough, mate. Because like when me and you are chatting, there's no that barrier there. It's like this is someone who relates to me. We relate to each other. So you can kind of just speak your truth, and you know he's not gonna. I know you're not gonna judge me, and I'm not gonna judge you. Whereas sometimes there's that bit of mystery when you don't know someone. You're like, oh, is this going to be
Absolutely.
perceived in a certain way? But I think really it just comes down to your own insecurities and your anxieties. Like there's certain perceived anxieties I have around going speaking to an attractive girl that like make me play a persona, and I think when you're playing a persona, that then creates a barrier of you're performing, and when
Yeah.
you're performing you've got
Es-
pressure.
yeah. Especially as it's become almost like a game almost to speak to attractive women, if you get me. Like if you watch like all these pickup artists and these sort of podcasts, they make talking now to an attractive woman almost feel like you almost have to view it like a game, that you can't just be your genuine self and let that character shine through. You almost have to, like, right, you're trying to get the number here, you're trying to get the location to sleep with her, you're trying to, sort out all these things, and because of you're viewing it in a less genuine way, you do not appear as genuine when you're doing it. At least I agree with you. That's what I've struggled with in the past when it comes to women. It's that you cannot, well, you can be your genuine self, and when you are, that's beautiful. But it almost feels that, especially in these artificial settings like clubs, for example, you have to put on a persona, and that persona is by default disingenuous because it is not your true self.
You fucking articulated that perfectly, Jerome. The whole problem with that is you're playing a game, you're acting out something that's not you, and with that, there's always going to be the realization that you're not living up to the performance, and that there is, I think, where the anxiety sits. That gap between how you
Yeah,
think you're being perceived and what you're actually what you're being perceived as. You can never correlate that, so you're bringing up anxiety through that. And I've found when, especially mate, when I came out this meditation retreat, we came straight out of the retreat and started speaking to
Yeah,
these
I'm really
two
interested in
girls.
this. You mentioned it to me. You mentioned it to me at the mastermind, mate. You went on this meditation retreat, and it just sounded like so. It sounded like something you'd expect Leonardo DiCaprio to do on the beach or something like that. You know, like it's a proper like new age hippie thing, and I was really interested in what you meant by it.
Yeah, so it was like a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and I went there with the pure like goal of just to overcome or understand my anxiety a little bit more. And Jerome, like, I think you should do it, mate, because it's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was just pure mental warfare. But it really made me like understand, because
Mental.
like you haven't mental warfare, mate. You haven't got any
Yeah.
external stimulus coming in. Like you've got no distractions. Like when you get a negative thought, we tend to often go on our phone to distract ourselves from that negative thought. But because you haven't got any external stimulus, you can't do anything else. You've really got to sit with that negative thought. And once you can do that and you have stillness, you can break down into where that negative thought's coming from. Why does that negative thought arise? Why do I attach to it? Is it a perceived a bad experience I had, a trauma? Is it an expectation of the future? And you just like kind of like delve into your own mind. But we never get that stillness in this day and age. So it really helped me with just like understanding my relationship with women more than anything. Because when I came out of that retreat and we was with these two girls, and we were sat in a cafe, and I could hear the thoughts coming up of like, oh, you're acting weird. What you do? Why you sat like that? All the like the weird thoughts that come up when you're speaking to an attractive girl and you're trying to play a persona. But they were so much more quieter that I could just, whilst I was having a conversation, I could observe the thoughts come up and I could just like bat them off, and I could just be there with my true authentic self. And for me, it just broke down a barrier of trying to be someone and letting me be vulnerable. And that's what I try and do with everything now. That's why
Yeah.
I'm open speaking about my anxiety in that, because I think being vulnerable, that is me. This is my experience. And if I can share it with people, it's powerful.
It's very powerful, mate, and thank you for sharing that about your insecurities and what you discovered from that meditation retreat. I did something similar last year. It wasn't a meditation retreat, but I went on these youth exchanges with the Erasmus project. It's like this European Union funded scheme, and I met loads of good people here. But they took you out of what I call the real world, if you get what I mean. Like your day-to-day 9 to 5 is irrelevant there. Your problems from back at home is completely irrelevant, because now you're in this community almost of 20-something other young people from around Europe, and now your priority is foraging for wood to light a fire. And I tell you, man, anxiety goes out the window. There is no such thing as anxiety at these places, because there's no distractions from the modern day. And I genuinely feel, man, that the reason why so many young people these days, and so many, especially young men, have so much anxiety is not actually our fault. It's not like a problem with us. It's the world in which we live in, if that makes sense. I know lots of people say that. It's like, oh yeah, blame the system, etc. But I genuinely feel the world that we live in at the moment is sort of hyper promoting anxiety because of this overstimulated world that we live in, as we are not true to ourselves anymore, because we don't live in this sort of natural environment which I was living in on these exchanges. I was literally, part of the job was I would gather resources in the day. Me and my tribe, we would cook them at night time, and it was this proper tribal sense of living which anxiety does not exist in, because you are being far more true to your authentic self, because your authentic self still is a caveman, if that makes sense. You are still in that mentality still that you want to live like that. And the modern day has made it so that you can't live like that. And so you have to find excuses, or find, not excuses necessarily, but sort of supplements, replacements for this natural feeling that you used to get from nature and used to get from being your authentic self. Now you have to find through video games, pornography, which is destroying you. And I know I talked about a lot of different topics there, mate, but that was my train of thought there, man.
No, 100%, Jerome. Like that, I look through everything through evolution. Like that's just the way I see the mind and the body. It's like we are just a natural process of natural selection and being evolving through millions of years. And you really think about how our minds and our bodies have been evolved to live. It's through it's a caveman. It's hunter gatherer systems. So
Yeah,
we've
we're
we've
still
been
cavemen, bro.
around tribes, and we are literally cavemen. We've been around tribes. We used to go out and hunt and gather. So our energy is to wake up in the morning, go out and gather our food, and then be social and celebrate once you've done the task for the day. And our anxiety systems are fight or flight. So if we see a tiger, we're there to run or freeze. So everything in our body, all the systems, is there for an evolutionary purpose. And this current society we live in is like, you go on social media and you see 10 millionaires, you see 100 people with a six pack, you see all this. And what that does is that it just shows you where you're not, and you think that's the norm. So your perceived perception of where you are in life is just constantly like down here, really low, because you think everyone else is achieving loads. And it's just the nature of
Yeah.
our society to make you feel less. And I honestly, man, I think a lot of my anxiety comes from like watching these self-improvement videos, watching, going on
Yes,
Instagram
I
and
was
seeing
just
everything.
about to talk about that.
Yeah,
I
go
was
on, Joe,
just
talk
gonna
about it, mate.
mention. No, I was just gonna talk about that, mate, and you brought it up, and it was like, yeah, I was just thinking that. Is that it's almost like now in the self-improvement world, is that it's lost a bit of its self-awareness. That originally it was designed, do you remember like watching Hamza back in like 2022? And it was very much sort of like mental, physical, spiritual self-improvement, if that makes sense. It was very much, you are on this mission in life to become a better person. There was something a little bit more philosophical about it. And now, if you look at a lot of self improvement, it is literally just fast cars, a harem of women, living in Dubai. That's the goal. And I don't think it is the goal, man. I really don't. Like, obviously, I want to go to Dubai at some point. I want to travel more, but I don't think living in places like that is the end goal. And I think a lot of people are so money obsessed within self improvement. And don't get me wrong, money is really important. Like, you need to be a bit money obsessed. You need to be, in fact, more than a bit money obsessed. You need to be very much money obsessed. But it can't be the only obsession. And it has to be almost secondary to your sort of spiritual well being and your purpose in life, which I think is far more important.
I think people look in the wrong places for what's going to make them feel at peace and ease with themselves. So, like what we were explaining there, like the
Exactly,
fast
man.
cars, the let's say the house, the traveling, all the hot women, they think that that is going
Yeah.
to fill this void of them feeling uneasy. When you're looking in the wrong place, everything is just an interpretation of our environment. It all starts in our mind, and
Well,
like once you
you might be
realize
looking in
that
the wrong place.
100% they are looking in the wrong place. And I think our
Might be.
problem, Jerome,
Or it
is
might be for some people, that might be what you want.
yeah, we don't know, mate. I think most of the time it's
I mean,
because we have this feeling of separation. Like this like gets a bit like spiritual, but we think that we're separate from people. When if you look at the underlying reality, we are all exactly the same. We're all just this one flow of nature. And when we think we're separate, we have to do things to prove to ourselves that we're worth of value, and that's where the money comes through. That's where the cars come through. That's where the look at me, I've got a load of social media followers, all of that. And look, what I'm doing now is in most of return when I'm trying to grow the podcast is to help people, but is to also gain my social status so I can show people I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And that's just an illusion in itself, because I've got this idea that all of this is going to make me feel at ease with myself, when in reality the only thing that's going to make me feel easy with myself, is going to make me feel confident, is accepting who I am and stop trying to proving
yeah.
things to people. But that constant chase of the material goals is what we think is the answer for that. But do you reckon, Jerome, we have to experience that first to realize it? Because I intellectually know that the material goals aren't going to make me feel good, but I feel like I have to experience that to really get that true understanding.
Yes, I think you do. I genuinely do. I think this is why that aspect of self improvement is still it's still quite real. It's you need to experience the high life to genuinely get an understanding of what it means to be yourself. You need that. It's not the be all and end all, as you talked about, mate. But just because it's fake, mate, doesn't necessarily mean that it's fake to you. And I think you need to experience it. To be quite honest with you, I think you need to. I think you need an experience of the greater things in life to appreciate the more simple things. But that greater thing in life doesn't necessarily have to be this image that's been created by Dubai influencers. It can literally just be you experience how do we say, your ego has been stroked, if you get what I mean. Your ego has to be stroked at points, and I think, and then only once that's been done a few times, then you feel, do I really need this anymore? Can I just have the satisfaction of a better life? I think, especially being a man, which, half of the population are, um, genuinely there's this desire within you to be a conqueror of some sorts. There's this desire within you to want to try and shape the world to your means. And to do that, I think a lot of it is speaking directly from your ego. And that's not a bad thing in any way whatsoever. But it is your ego talking, this desire to want to change the world and desire to want to achieve something with it. And I think you do actually have to do that. And you have to at least satisfy part of it before realizing that it's not the be all and end all. And I know that might sound really contradictory, but that you need to please a part of your body before pleasing another part of it.
No, that makes perfect sense. Everything's like paradoxical when you really get down to the...
Does it actually make? I appreciate that, because that was I thought I sounded like I was on fucking DMT talking there, but I'm glad you understood.
That's the mushrooms you had before, wasn't it, Jerome? That was the mushroom speaking.
Yeah, bro. No, that genuinely sounded like as I was talking, I always like second guess myself a little bit. That's good. It's just the anxiety coming back again, man, which we were talking about. I was like, what the hell? Is this actually making sense? But you did understand it. It was making sense,
Mate, them stream of consciousness, like, this is what I've learned from the podcast, Jerome. Like, when you go off on tangents like that, you learn to articulate what you actually know. And it's really interesting, mate. So like that, to me, that made perfect sense. And the way I interpreted that was, like, we learn most by experiences. And we've got an expectation on how the nice car's going to make us feel, how the hot woman's going to make us feel, how the loads of money's going to make us feel. And as much as people tell us that we could read these spiritual books when they say that's not the answer, for sometimes you need to actually sit in that experience to have that expectation break, to have the illusion break, so then you can truly realize what is important in life. And you have to sit with that broken expectation to kind of sit there and go, right, I really need to reevaluate who I am now and where I want to go.
So you cracked up a bit there, Alex.
Do you still hear me, Jerome?
Yeah, I can hear you now, man. You just you cracked up a little bit at your previous point, but it's all right, man.
Right, yeah, so you need that expectation to, like, break the illusion that, like, the fast car is going to make you feel good or whatever. You need that to break, to, like, sit down and think, right, I need to reevaluate where to go now. And then I think that's when you kind of find your authentic self, like, what actually makes you happy. So, but I don't think I have, like, goals for the nice car. For me, it's more about, like, freedom and autonomy. Like, the only reason I want to make money is so I can... Like, I can go and do what I want with my day. So if I want to go, let's say, climb a mountain and I don't want to work, I can go and climb a mountain. Or if I want to have all my family over, if I want to go to a holiday to France to climb the mountains, whatever I want to do, I can actually do that. And that's the only reason that I want to earn money, is to have freedom and autonomy. That's literally the only reason.
I'm exactly the same, mate. I believe you need it for freedom. But I'm actually not entirely against like work. Like, a lot of people I see in the sort of the self-improvement world, etc., they sort of view work as just a means to essentially become an entrepreneur. But I often find that you need to work as a human being, and that this life that you could potentially create with, passive income, just being able to travel wherever you want, being able to meet up with friends wherever you want in the world, as cool as it is, it's like living your life constantly on a holiday. And I don't think that's very... depends what you're doing, I suppose. If you're sort of trying to influence people to become free, then there is a point to it. But if you're just living your life, with hot women, driving fast cars and traveling the world, then your life is pretty pointless. And I think there is a great purpose in struggle, if that makes sense. There's a great purpose in having a job, going out and being with people, and like, you're earning your bread, you're earning your milk, and there's something quite archaic about that. And I think it really does appeal to the human soul in a way which, just traveling around with hot women and fast cars doesn't.
Yeah, like I've just been reading Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you've read it before, by Viktor Frankl.
So what, sorry?
Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've read it. It's
No, I
about a
haven't heard
guy
of it.
who's
I haven't heard. Please
Mate,
tell
you
me
should
about it,
read
man.
it, Jerome. So it's about a guy who
Yeah.
survived the Holocaust. So he got sent to Auschwitz, and he was like this psychoanalyst. And his whole story is about how he found meaning in the suffering. And like, obviously, to that extent, I'm not saying that working a 9 to 5 is like Auschwitz, but our version of suffering is sometimes
Yeah,
you've got
I
to go to a
know.
job you hate. Sometimes you have to
Yeah.
go and do that job you hate, and that you've got to go and speak to the people you don't like. But you can find meaning in that. You can find
Part of living is doing things you don't enjoy. Genuinely, part of living is
it.
doing things you don't enjoy, man. And if you, here's the thing, like I've been actually, it's funny you mentioned that we talk about this topic now. When I was younger, I used to always have this on and off debate with a friend of mine from school, and he would always say things like, "Surely the end result of human progress is AI, and that humans essentially live their lives in complete bliss, and robots do everything for us." And I always sort of caveated and always responded to him by saying, then we are not human. Like, my biggest fear is that we become we become the humanity of Wall-E, if you ever watched that film. You know, where the humans are all fat, overweight, we have AI doing absolutely everything for us. We live in a constant state of consumerism. There is no God, there is no family. We just live to exist and to consume. And we have machines do everything for us. And objectively, that is bliss. Objectively, we have fast food, we have infinite comfort and infinite pleasure. But it's complete hell at the same time as well, because we are not actually living up to our life's potential, which part of it is struggling to achieve our goals and create something better from it.
Yeah, that seems to be like the core of all like the
Yeah.
religious like teachings as well. Is like pain and suffering is the essential reality, and how you deal with that and how you interpret the pain and suffering is dictates to the outcome of your life. And you just see it if you sit down and you spend your whole day on social media, or if you're eating a load of junk food. Do that for a week and see how you feel. You feel like shit. But if you go out and go to the gym, if you go out and do hard things you don't want to
Yeah.
do, see how you feel at the end of that week, and you will feel 10 times better in yourself. So it is often the hard things that you don't want to do. When you pursue them and you overcome them, that's when you get that feeling of gratitude and that feeling of improvement.
Because you've actually had to fight against something. But even though that fight is against yourself, it's still fighting against something to achieve it. And it's so strange when, you know, when I word it like this. But life is war. And I don't like saying that because I've heard people say it before, and it's like, oh, you know, it's not war, there's love as well. But no, life is war, mate. And any attempt to try and sort of pacify that is actually destroying the human spirit.
Yeah, for sure, mate. We've got that natural
Yeah.
inclination to want to improve, but we've also got the
Natural
natural
inclination to,
inclination to be a man, to go out and improve things and get and better
yeah.
ourselves. But there's also that natural inclination, the human nature to sit in comfort, and there's always a balance in between. There's one side of you that's like,
Oh,
yeah, go on, just eat them Doritos, mate, sit there and play a bit of PlayStation. But as soon as you do that, there's another side of you that's like, right, dude, you need to get up, you need
yeah.
to go to the gym. And it's about sitting in the middle and
I,
realizing, like, where do I actually want to go? What activities and what pursuits are going to get me closer to my goal?
Yeah, don't be a geek, mate. That's the thing. I talk about this a lot on my when I make Instagram reels and videos. I talk about this concept balance actually quite a lot. And that's, you have to be dedicated, you have to be disciplined, you have to do your own grind, go to the gym, be successful. But don't make that entirely your personality to the extent where you don't have fun anymore. And you need the balance of social life, you need the balance of enjoyment, coupled with the great sense of striving for a goal. Because if you have one without the other, you are essentially a machine. You are essentially just working all the time, you're not enjoying life. And if you're the other one, where you not have no goals whatsoever, and you just want to live in bliss, then you're a waste man. You know, I know that's not a great term to use in this situation, but it's the only word that I could think of at that's time. And I feel being a human is the balance of both. It's the chilling with your brothers and your family around the campfire, drinking and celebrating after a hard day's work, surviving. And I know that's the caveman example, but just related to the modern world, it's working, it's striving, it's achieving things. It doesn't have to be necessarily monetarily, but you are achieving something with your time and your purpose. And then at the same time, learning to take a step back from that, don't take yourself too seriously in the matter, and enjoying the spoils of your graft with the people you love the most and having a laugh.
Yeah, in time, I think the worst thing is
Yeah.
when time is wasted due to carelessness. Like if you waste time due to like just
You
scrolling
made a
through
video about
Instagram
this
or
earlier.
oh,
Mm.
did you?
Yeah, you did. You made a video about this earlier, didn't you? About
Oh yeah, yesterday.
waste
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
yeah. It's really big. Like it's something I notice I do in myself, Jerome. And something I'm really trying to like really fix in my life. Like time lost due to carelessness is the worst time. And like going out and chilling with your brother or chilling with your mates, that's not lost due to carelessness. That's you enjoying life. But when you look at stuff like I just sat down and consumed loads of content on social media, or I just
Oh,
wasted
what
a
you
couple hours I didn't need to waste.
whip out your
That is
phone?
when yeah, you just sat there just with your head down, staring at a screen, and it is the worst amount of time spent. Like you're not achieving anything, you're not getting any good state of mind from that, and that is what most of our society is now. It's so easy in society to lose yourself in these instant gratification. I know there's so much information out there about stop consuming instant gratification, but it is everywhere around us, and
Yeah,
your mind is
you
always
see.
inclined to try and do the comfort.
I mean, you see it on the train all the time, man. Like in those brief couple seconds, when you're, let's say you're getting a train from A to B. During that entire 5-minute train journey, you have people just sat on their phones scrolling through Instagram, and I know that's only a short slice of the day, but it just shows you how sort of consuming this is really. That 10 years ago, etc., people couldn't have done that. But then again, they would have read the newspaper. But it's that sort of thing. It's like everybody these days seems to be trying to distract themselves from the moment with something to take their minds away from it.
I think mostly it's just running away from your own mind as well.
Yeah,
So like that is a
running away
natural
from your
human
mind.
like what yeah, what you said with the newspaper, like that is just another way of people running away from their own mind. And because we've got to deal with these negative thoughts that are uneasy, like you've got anxiety, what's so easy to do now is the moment you get anxiety, you can pull out your phone and get distracted from that anxiety. But if you
Yep.
sit with your feelings and your emotions, that's when you truly figure out, like, right, this triggers me. Why does it trigger me? And you can start figuring out your own problems. But you need times of
Yeah.
stillness for that. You can't be in a perpetual state of distraction. Otherwise, you're never going to figure out where you want to go and who you are.
I have a question actually, man, about that. Is that do you feel that you better sort out your own internal anxieties by yourself, or when you have somebody with you to talk to about these problems?
I would say conversation is the best way to figure anything out. And like the
Right.
times I feel most present and mindful is when I'm having a conversation with someone, when you've got that human connection. That is the best that you feel. And sometimes as well, like you believe your own narratives. So you think you have
Yeah.
this idea of how to improve. You think you have this idea of who you are. And sometimes it takes someone to objectively, from the outside, observe your framework of thinking, observe the way you behave to break that illusion from your own narrative. So I really think like and this is another thing we're losing is the art of human conversation. Like you learn so much about yourself, you really connect with
Yeah.
someone and they can give you authentic, honest feedback, which you just can't get when you're sometimes contemplating your own thoughts.
Oh yeah, because if you don't speak to people, you just end up living in your own head all the bloody time. That's the thing. You just end up internalizing these issues, which actually they need to escape. Often, what I find, man, is that if I'm really upset about something, like oh yeah, this girl didn't text back or whatever, I'm annoyed about it. But if I speak to somebody about it, a friend who's someone I can just talk about, suddenly I realize by the end of that conversation, I didn't really matter. That didn't really matter at all, did it? Like it's not a big deal. Why was I making it such a big thing in my own head? And that's why I think it's really important to actually have people to talk to. I know it sounds so obvious when you say it like that, but these problems are better solved speaking to somebody rather than just internalizing it all the time. You need that period of self-reflection, but to speak to somebody about your problems is far better than to just have it all in your head and be on your own path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think when you hold on to that insecurity, so say you've had something that you're really insecure about, and when you finally open up to someone, you have let go of the idea that that insecurity is you. When you can tell someone about your insecurity, you've let go of the power of that thing is something that you're ashamed of because you've shared it with someone. Now you've opened yourself up to being judged by someone. And when you can let go of that vulnerability, that you can be vulnerable with people, you're showing a certain amount of confidence in that no longer affects me, and your brain is no longer ashamed of it. And I think there's something to do with like our vibrational frequencies of the certain emotions. And like if you look at shame and guilt, it's literally at the bottom. It's
the lowest, aren't they? The lowest on that. I've seen that. I've seen the same thing as what you do.
100% is the lowest state of vibrational frequency that you can be in, and we are just frequencies and vibrations. So if you're ashamed about something, if you're ashamed about your anxiety, if you're ashamed about your weight, the way you look, that is going to be the lowest vibrational frequency that you can be in, and that's going to hold you back. It's going to keep you in a box. But when you can share it, you're open to letting that go of shame and something that you can start being confident about.
And it's funny you mentioned the vibrations, mate. Maybe that's just what charisma is. You are vibrating on a higher frequency than what most people are used to. And so you appear to be this figure that you're not necessarily are. And when you have such feelings of shame and guilt, because you're vibrating on such a low level, you cannot be charismatic. That's what I think it is all about. It's just your vibrational level. And I feel, at least this could just be me being a bit slightly judgmental, but I feel a lot of people these days, unfortunately, they vibrate on a lower level than what they would have been if they were 50 years ago, because of the level of anxiety that most people have to deal with.
100%. I want to ask, like, how do you deal with anxiety, Jerome? What's your way of like dealing with it? Because everyone's is like really different, and I think it's such a big topic for us to talk about.
Yeah, that's a great question, mate. The way I deal with anxiety is I sort of do what you do, where I sort of try and rationalize it in my own head. But that only goes so far. I think the way I do it is if I have to imagine myself from a third perspective, from a third person perspective. That's how I deal with it. Because we internalize our problems all the time within ourselves. And when I'm going into a room and I have to, for example, speak to somebody I've never spoken to before, and it's high stakes or whatever, this business or whatever like that. If I'm giving in a CV or just speaking to an employer, if I view it from the perspective of I'm Jerome doing it, I'm going to be a little bit more anxious. But if I do it from the perspective where I'm watching Jerome doing it, then suddenly I'm not anxious anymore. If you view yourself like a character in a film, would that character in that film be anxious in this situation? No. But you can only be that character in that film, for me at least, if you are looking at him or her from a third-person perspective. So generally, to avoid as much anxiety as possible, my advice, if you can do it, is just view yourself in the third person rather than the first, because we internalize all of our problems all the time. So if you just take a step back and say, no, Jerome's there, you're doing that, what would he do objectively in that situation? Do it.
I think the underlying core of that, which that is fucking really good advice, Jerome, is you're detaching away from the anxiety, because you can separate yourself away from that anxiety. You're actually watching it and observing it, and that is the power of meditation. When you can observe things with equanimity, you can observe it without attaching this idea of that's you. Then the nature of reality is for emotions to come and go. Emotions arise and then they go. The only reason why that anxiety stays is because you believe you're that anxiety. You believe you are anxious. You believe you are Alex, the anxious person, and that reinforces it. It perpetuates it. But when you can observe it, 100%, it becomes your. Yeah, go on, Jerome.
No. Sorry, I find this so interesting, man. It's because you said exactly what I said, but you said it in a far more sort of spiritual way. And what I said it, you detach yourself from yourself, was I said it in a far more sort of layman term speak. And I just think that's interesting how we both communicated the exact same message, but you did it in a way which would sort of appeal to one group of people, and I did it in a way which would appeal to another group of people. But it is the same truth.
Mate, I think that's the power of the internet. So what we're trying to do with these personal brands, we're trying to relate to people. So we're sharing the same messages, really, and most people are better in improving themselves. And the power of a personal brand and the power of the internet is going to be, you're going to be able to find pockets of the internet of people that relate to you. And so the way I communicate something is going to relate to someone better then you might communicate it, but the way you communicate it is going to relate to someone better than the way I would communicate it. And it works, like, people can really involve in your character. And I think what we're doing here, Jerome, when we're trying to build these personal brands is so important, because you're finding people that you can connect to in a deep, meaningful way, which you wouldn't have access to if we didn't have the internet. So as much as we shit on the
No,
internet, it's actually got a lot of
it's
power to it.
amazing. Oh, the internet is one of the greatest inventions in human history. Like, I'm a bit of a Luddite. Like, I don't like necessarily the way technology is advancing in certain areas, but I will hands up admit the internet is amazing. Like, the level of power that it's given people is insane. It's both a tool for immense knowledge and also immense stupidity. And it's just how you use that tool. That's the key here. Like, if you went back 50 years ago, you would not be able to find the level of information in a textbook, or 100 textbooks, or 1,000 textbooks that you can find simply on Wikipedia right now. And if you are smart enough to realize that, the internet could be a massive advantage to you. Like, half the crap I know in my life, man, it's from the internet. More than half of what I know is from the internet. Like, I was never an avid book reader when I was a child. You know, I read things on the internet. I watched documentaries on the internet. That's how I consume my knowledge of things. And if we didn't have that, I can't help thinking that I wouldn't be as smart as I am now, without sounding too arrogant here. But you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. Like, literally, my whole personality and
Yeah.
character has been evolved around watching Joe Rogan's. That's how it first started. Was I started watching Joe Rogan's, and then I just
That's what
started developing curiosity.
kickstarted your podcasting. So your love of podcasting, man, was Joe Rogan. I love that.
Everything I do, like meditating, and I all learned it from Joe Rogan's, and then my natural curiosity has just flown into different pockets of the internet where I've followed it, and then I've researched this, I've watched a YouTube video here, and it's using the internet correctly for the things that you're interested in instead of letting it use you. But most of the time, it's so easy to let the
Yeah,
internet use you and let the algorithms control what you're doing. But it's as you said, if you
yeah,
can utilize it correctly, you can learn anything. You can be whatever you want now, because all the information you ever need to
absolutely,
know is literally a Google search away.
absolutely, man. And that's really quite scary. At the same time, it is really quite interesting. Like, the power that you possess at your fingertips is something which would have terrified somebody 50 years ago. It's interesting you mentioned about Joe Rogan, where you got your inspiration for doing podcasts. From speaking to you, you seem. I remember speaking to you at the mastermind, etc. You said people like Jordan Peterson, appealed to you far much more than people like Andrew Tate. And I'm just interested, why is that? Why did certain figures within the self improvement world interest you more than others, even though they both, a lot of the time, they both preach the exact same message?
I think, like, I actually listen to Andrew Tate, and like what he's saying most of the time is spot on, but I think it's just their delivery. And I like the way I
Yeah,
incline more to, like, I'm a very overthinker. I like to intellectualize things. And the way Peterson explains things is very, like, intellectual. He goes into the philosophical background of everything. Same, the thing maybe about Andrew Tate that throws me off a little bit is there is that persona there. Like, he's doing it to grow his audience. He acts in a certain way to grow his
yeah,
audience, and you can tell by the way he puts certain things across. And I don't like in people being inauthentic. I like authenticity. That's what I relate to. And when I watch Peterson, when I watch Joe Rogan, they are people who have this natural curiosity, and they're so authentically them that it really just, like, comes across to me. Whereas I've no doubt that Andrew Tate's probably like that in real life, but there's a certain persona he's playing to, like, get views, and that just,
absolutely.
it puts me off straight away.
Putting on an image. Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's putting on an image, man. Like, you said it. You said it perfectly just then. It's being completely genuine with yourself, and I feel, although we've spoken about a lot of topics in this last 45 minutes, genuinely, that's the one that keeps coming back. It's this genuine sense of being genuinely authentic to yourself, and that is the most powerful thing and that you could do in your life. It will increase your charisma. It will increase your vibration. It's pure authenticity.
For sure, Jerome. Like, what got you into this path, Jerome? Like, what got you into self-improvement, spirituality? I always find it
Well,
interesting to find the turning points for
yeah.
people.
Well, I'd read a few books. I'd read, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah,
I read that, and I thought, wow, you can. That's why I was saying you can sort of detach yourself from these situations far easier than, well, not easily. It's not easy at all, but you can detach yourself from these situations. And I sort of I'd read many books, or a few books actually, on sort of spirituality, and I felt to myself, there's something wrong here. There's something wrong. I grew up a little bit. I wasn't the person I am now when I was growing up. I had a big like character sort of progression as I was a child to a young adult, and so because of that, I still maintained quite a lot of that anger as being, like I wasn't this person when I was this age. So there was a lot of anger in me as I was a teenager, as going into a young adult. So coupled with this anger, this sort of interest in spirituality, and genuinely, man, I've always had like a love of history as well. So you combine all of these things together, and genuinely, I just felt what I want to do is just better myself in spiritual means, physical means, and intellectual means. And you combine those 3 points together, being spiritually better, physically better, and intellectually better. You can create an Ubermensch, man. Like, genuinely, that is the Ubermensch, bro. It is someone who is strong physically, mentally, and spiritually. And although these can be all subjective, like, what is strong spiritually, Is it belief in God? Is it not a belief in God? Are you God? Do you worship God? For me, it's about being connected with a higher thing. It doesn't have to be a God, but it's connected to something. It could be nature. It could be a creator, so to speak. Physically, in great shape. And then intellectually, sharp as a knife, mate. You know things. You know facts, which most people don't know. You have an extensive knowledge of history. You have extensive knowledge of world affairs. Couple that with being physically fit. And most importantly, you need the spiritual side because you need humility. You can be the best person around. And I feel when I look at certain people, for example, do you remember Alex, do you remember they were very popular in 2006-7, sort of the internet atheist crowd. You had people like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, that sort of thing. And they were very intellectually smart. But they lacked like the humility side of things. They believed that genuinely what they were preaching was 100% correct in every way whatsoever. And originally I felt, these guys are funny, they're making fun of stupid Christians. But as I grew older, I thought, actually, they're incredibly arrogant. And they've lost a great sense of humility from that. And I believe you need that sense of humility. Because without it, you're not living, you're just sort of, you're living this inauthentic image without humility. And so without trying to get it back to what you originally asked me, mate, generally what got me into self-improvement was I want to improve myself on those 3 factors above all.
Yeah, that thing you said about
a dislike towards being told what to do. A rebellious instinct.
Yeah, I think you got to have that to a certain extent. Like, I got it at first when I thought, like, the system, I need to break the system, I need to be against the system. Sometimes that, like, energy, that motivation, it kind of kickstarts you on your journey, and then you realise that is just another thing in your mind that you're playing around. But what you said about, like, Richard Dawkins and that, it's, you become so ingrained in this identity that your ideas are right, that you forget to be open to other ideas, and it stops you from growing. It really does. It prevents you from learning new things. And like when I first started listening, yeah, you should be. That's what Socrates was saying. He was like, be open. You're always wrong. You don't know anything. And when you play with that mindset of you don't know anything, you're open to new ideas which shape your perception of reality. But when you close yourself off to a set of ideas, you're not open to new ones coming in. And it's a hard thing to do, because when you learn something that's against what you thought was right, a part of you has to die to let that new information settle in and shape your perception. But you've got to be willing to let go of the identity that is you, that thinks that you know all them things.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting you mentioned. Yeah, you have to kill that old part of yourself which would have held those beliefs, because the ego associated with that would not allow you to accept a new idea. So it's always being prepared to accept new information. You do have to have that humility within you to say to you at some point, potentially, I might have been wrong.
it's the essence of life. Everything's growing and dying. It's breathing and then
Yeah,
in with the breath, out with the breath. Everything's constantly growing and expanding and then coming back in. And you've just got to trust the process that, like, when you're expanding and the new things you've learned, they're going to come back and you've got to be willing to let go of them ideas to learn something new. And if you just constantly hold on to your ideas thinking they're right, you're never going to grow. So, like, being open minded is another thing that is like one of the most important aspects. And that at the base of that is humility. It's being willing to admit when you're wrong and not strongly identifying with everything that you think's right.
yeah. What's your story in regards to self improvement then, Alex?
Oh, good question, Jerome. That's a.
Because you
It's
said
really
you
hard to look.
you said you're very open with you're very open with your vulnerabilities, etc. And I can really tell that you're an open book in regards to this. But it had to start somewhere. Like, did when you were growing up, did you feel separate from the herd, if you get what I mean? And you felt that you had to sort of stand out in order to make your mark? Or was it more sort of a general sense of, oh, I'm overweight and I now need to lose weight? Was there sort of something very sort of simplistic that got you into it? Or was it straight away like a desire to be something different?
Yeah, with it was when I was in school. Like, I never felt like I connected with anyone. So I used to go to school and I used to have this need to make people laugh. Like, I used to have to try and be funny all the time because I never felt like I
Yeah.
connected with people. And I could remember I could never like look someone in the eyes. Like, ever, I couldn't have a normal conversation without trying to be someone. And I was just like so anxious, mate, all the time. But I lived in this perpetual state of anxiety where I didn't have the awareness to realize that that's not a normal way to be. I just thought that was what it was like being a
I,
human. And then
I thought it was normal as well.
yeah, you do.
I had
You
the same
think it's
thing.
natural.
You think but it's not though. It sounds easy for us to say now, but it really isn't. Like, if I could go back and I'm sure you'd do the same with a former version of yourself, you tell them that like it's not normal to think like this, but we do, and so many people do. They grow up thinking that the whole world sort of hates them, when in reality the world is actually ambivalent towards you, and if anything, you could actually be quite a standout individual if you just view yourself in a positive light.
It's really hard to do, Jerome, though, especially when you're younger as well, because you're going through all this stage of your life where you're trying to develop an identity and you're trying to develop who you are as a person, find out what you like, what you don't like. And I think when you're younger, you've got so much pressure to fit in. And the more you get, I don't know if it's just getting older or if it's just because we're on self improvement. Like, the older you get, the more wise you get. You realize that, like, the idea of trying to
I
fit
think
into a
both,
role
Alex.
is
I think
is just an illusion.
both.
Yeah, it probably is
Yeah,
both. And I think the more experiences you have, the more you do realize that, like, yeah, what I'm trying to do isn't the way I have to be. I can just be myself. But for me, it was more just like the anxiety that I was experiencing, like socially and with my own who I think I am. It was just so extreme that I had to find a way to improve it. It was rather sink or swim because I couldn't have lived my life, the rest of my life, like that. No way. It would have been absolute hell to live in that state of anxiety.
it's strange, mate, because I'd consider you to be quite an extroverted person, Alex. And I'd also consider myself to be extroverted. But yet we both dealt with these severe anxieties growing up as children, or growing up even as young adults. Like, I'd be lying to you, mate, if I said to you, oh, I'm not anxious anymore. Because of course I still am. Everyone still is. But it's just ways of, like, dealing with it better. Like, man, I still sometimes get, like, I still sometimes get a bit nervous and anxious walking into a pub. And I work in bars. And it's like, how the hell did I get to this level where walking into a place, like a public place where it's meant to be sociable, I can still get a little bit of anxiety doing it. And it's like, where does that come from? Does it come from, is that natural? No, it's not natural. It came from within you because of your childhood experiences. And I'm not sure about you, Alex, but I still feel, even though I'm 24, you're 24 as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're the same age. We grew up in the exact same period. That I still feel to this day like almost like part of your battle is dealing with that childhood version of yourself, and growing up is overcoming that. But you're never going to fully overcome it. More like it's just going to grow into what you are now.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, Jerome. I literally went for a coffee with my mate today. And as you said, people perceive me as very extroverted, and I went into the coffee shop and I was anxious speaking to the cashier. For some reason, I felt like really weird. I didn't know what to do with myself. But it's what you said is the you have better ways of dealing with it. So when it comes up now, I sit there and I just observe the feelings of anxiety. I kind of let myself be anxious. And then you realize after a couple seconds of doing that, that there's nothing to be anxious about and you kind of settle in. But for me, it's always the conversation. If let's say social anxiety, for example, you're having a conversation, the worst part for me is the initial part of the conversation. That's when the anxiety arises. And that's probably because I've got a past version of me that interprets that scenario as anxious. So that comes up in my body. I get the feelings of anxiety. I feel really anxious. But the longer I sit there in the conversation, I calm down and then I'm myself. But I've never been able to get past the point of that anxiety arising. It still arises when I walk into a shop, when I walk into the gym, when I see a pretty girl. When I do something, that anxiety still comes up. I don't know how to get rid of that. But I think you just got to accept it and then settle in.
I've got a bit of advice actually how to deal with that, and I learned how to deal with this quite well. Is that you genuinely act weirder than you are. I know I sound absolutely crazy, but you genuinely just act with a little bit of character and flair. Like for example, you're going up to a coffee shop, a bartender, and you're like, 2 pints of Guinness, please, mate. And by saying it like that, it's almost like, okay, if they think they're going to have an opinion of you, which is where the anxiety comes from, you feel they're going to judge you, okay? If they're going to judge you, might as well make them judge you in a cool light. That's how I dealt with it, because I felt, actually, everyone's going to judge you, aren't they? And the anxiety is coming from a fear that they're going to judge me in a negative way. They're going to judge me as a weirdo, or they're just not going to like me. Because I think that's where it all comes from. It's this want to be liked. And so I thought, well, if they are going to judge me, which they aren't, actually, but if they are going to judge me, might as well make them judge me in a positive light. And so just...
Mate,
it's like putting an effort in.
That's really interesting, Jerome.
Yeah.
That's a Stoic principle. Yeah, so there's a Stoic principle of do things that make you stand out. And I remember hearing Tim Ferriss talk about this, where he used to walk down the streets in these really weird trousers. There'll be bright yellow trousers with pink dots on them. And he would walk, and then he would have a beard that was half shaven. So he would literally go out with his beard that side done, and then he would shave the other side. And he would literally do it just so people perceive him in a way that is weird. So then his peacocking. I might start doing stuff like that. Just purposely putting yourself in scenario.
It genuinely helped with my anxiety more than anything. Genuinely, it was this, for me at least. I don't think it. I mean, I'm not sure if it would work for everybody, but for me at least, certainly, that I always had this fear that people were judging me, and I can never get rid of it. So I just changed it. That they're not going to judge me in a negative light. They're now going to judge me in a positive light, and they're going to judge me as, oh God, this guy's a character, and it's worked. Genuinely, now when I go around places, I genuinely stand out. Just the way I dress, the way I act, and the slight mannerisms that I've now been doing for the last so many years now, that it's reached a point where it's not inauthentic. It's genuinely authentic now. And that's why I think you mentioned that I was charismatic, because it is so authentic, this peacocking nature to you, that the anxiety has gone, and now you still accept that people are judging you, but you accept that they're going to judge you in a way which is positive.
Yeah, the one thing I battle with, Jerome, and this is something I read the other day. It was
to be honest with you, mate, I'd never phrased anything. That was the first time I'd actually phrased that way of thinking before. So, generally, I never thought about that before.
This is what you get from conversations, mate. Honestly, the more you have these conversations, the more you start realizing things about yourself. It's the art of human conversation. It's amazing, Jerome. But one thing I'm battling with at the moment is confidence. If you're trying to be confident, I feel like that's trying to create a persona that can deal with the scenario better. But how do you get to the root of what that anxiety is? So that anxiety arises. But if you just deal with it in a way that you're trying to be confident, it's creating another persona on top of that anxiety. It's creating another narrative. Is there a need to go down into the root of that anxiety? Where is that coming from? Why does my body and my mind perceive that scenario as anxious? I always find is that childhood trauma? Is it just a natural human nature for social situations to have a lot of importance on them? What is the reason that the physiological effects of anxiety arise?
I don't know, to be fully honest with you, mate. but I assume it has both to do with nature and nurture. I assume that there is a natural element to this, that it's your subconscious desire to fit in. And so if you feel you're not fitting in, you feel that it's going to damage your standing with the herd. That's the natural side of things. And I assume there's also the nurture side from your childhood development, traumas potentially that have infected the way you think. But to be honest with you, man, I don't actually fully know. But I'd take a guess and assume it was those two reasons that affect why you feel anxious in certain situations, where the anxieties come from.
The mind is just infinitely complex, mate. I don't think we're ever going to understand what's going on. I think the idea of us trying to understand actually takes us away from what's happening. I think we can use our
Absolutely.
logical and rational minds to try and interpret everything, but in reality, like, language is just abstractions of what's going on. Like, I can never fully communicate how
Absolutely.
I'm feeling to someone, and I feel like language is a bit of a barrier. But when you can just, like, sometimes look at things for what they are instead of trying to put an idea around it, I think that takes, like, lessens the harshness of it as well.
Yeah, it's called being dense, man. You talked about being humble before earlier, and we had a big conversation about this. But this is another thing on to just sort of bring up what you spoke about there about being too literal with things. That being dense and genuinely not understanding that not everything is completely logical. I think once you understand that, it's part of your spiritual growth that not everything can be explained logically. Not everything can be explained just by using the mind. That's so much of what we talk about is a feeling thing. It comes from within. That is something that you can't actually logically explain. But so many people have it stuck in their own minds that every single problem can be solved rationally, and it can't. Quite a lot of things. Some things do have to be irrational to understand it.
Yeah, it's building the trust in your intuition, that
Yeah,
feeling that you get that you know is the
intuition.
right
Yeah,
thing to do. It's not trying to come up with a concept or an idea around that intuition. It's just following what sometimes feels good for you. And that's the basic Taoist principle where they're like, literally, the Tao is happening. And it's called Wu Wei, where it's like
yeah,
effortless action. It's like, just let life happen and let your intuition follow and fine tune it. Because who's to say that our minds and our concept of an idea is creating reality when reality is in actuality created us? So why should we not trust that the universe and the flow of life is actually going to fulfill us more than us trying to force and, like, create things?
yeah. It's don't live life like constantly pulling your shoes through the dirt. Don't make it as deliberately as hard as possible for you. What you just said there about the Taoist philosophy of the Wu Wei thing, what you just mentioned. Never heard of that before, by the way, but I love it. Is that if the universe is going that way, if your life is going that way, embrace it almost. Like go, like embrace it like you would like, you'd kiss a beautiful woman, you just go with it, rather than just constantly pulling your legs through the dirt.
Yeah, and I think that's what maybe the self-improvement advice goes wrong, where they try to, like, use cerebral horsepower to understand everything. Like, you just need to push through and do
You just
this
need
and
to
do that,
grind,
and it's
push.
yeah, it's the just grind, and it takes you away from what the natural flow of life is. And if life wants to send you on a more spiritual path, or if life wants to take you down a path where maybe you're not working out as much, and sometimes you learn different lessons from that, you grow in different ways. But we attach this identity and this concept to what we should be doing, and it takes us away
Yeah,
from what's actually happening. And sometimes you just got to put your trust in that everything's going to be all right.
yeah. I really like that, man. I really like that. That's you mentioned about the whole self-improvement thing. You are right that so much of it these days does seem to be almost like a fight. And I know I mentioned earlier that life is war. But at the same time, this is what's so strange. At the same time, it doesn't have to be war necessarily. It's war externally, but it doesn't have to be internally war. You don't have to be fighting yourself all the bloody time. And if anything, you need internal peace in order to be the better fighter to face the world. So instead of constantly fighting yourself with these problems, instead of grinding all the time, embrace the flow, as you mentioned. If your life is going this direction, if it is going to more towards spirituality, let it go towards spirituality. Don't think now that I'm interested in this, I'm not going to be on my grind. This is your grind, and don't even view it like a grind, because that implies some level of like force against yourself. No, this is your path now. This is your storyline. This is your main quest.
And it's so true,
Actually,
Jerome,
what
and
do you feel?
it's hard to.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I got a question for you now, man. What do you feel about the concept of like viewing your life like a game, so to speak? Because it's something which I talk about a little bit on my Instagram when I make stories, etc. It's something I talk about is that you view your life almost like a game, and if you do something adventurous, it's sort of like it's a side quest almost. But the main quest, etc., for a lot of people, they're trying to find it out. But in the meantime, at least do be constantly doing little side quests that make you feel more human, you know?
Yeah,
Viewing
I think
life
it's a
like a
good
game,
way to
essentially.
I think it's a good way to conceptualize it. I think that talks to the people that you're relating to. And it's a very good way to think like we still need to improve things in life. And you still actually, you don't need to, but it's good and it makes you feel good to go and get into the gym. It's good to go and do these things, speak to that woman. It's good to go and have adventures. And you can see, you can actually put it in a framework of like, I'm gaining experience points. I'm doing this and I'm going to
Yeah,
gain more experience points and get better here. And I think that
big
viewing your life as a game in and itself is just another way of viewing yourself in a manner that you can help improve. But I think it just speaks to the person you're speaking to, Jerome. I think that's a good way to conceptualize that to your target audience, because
Well,
essentially it is the
it's
same
more
thing
towards
as
myself.
like you're improving yourself.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that, bro. But it's to a target audience, yes. But it's directly more towards myself. That's how I've always conceptualized it. Because I mean, I used to play video games quite a lot, and to be honest, I still play the occasional strategy game. Naughty, naughty. But point is, I've always viewed myself as a character in that sort of sense. And so when you view yourself, when I played video games as a kid, I'd always personalize myself to that character. I'd always feel if I was this Fallout, if I was my Fallout 4 character, what would I do in this situation? And so it was always very easy for me to adopt that video game mentality to life because I viewed myself as the video game character. Now it's time to view the video game character as myself. And this world that we're living in, this is now the game. And okay, I can't do certain things I can do in Fallout, there's no ghouls jumping out at me. But what there are is there are challenges, there are opportunities, and you only have one life, so I'm not going to respawn. So might as well play on hardcore mode, which is what we're doing.
I think that's good as well because it looks as the challenge, and this is what you were saying in Man's Search for Meaning. It's like the challenges and the adversity you have. There's meaning in that. That side quest that's difficult. There's meaning in that
Yeah.
because you gain experience points. Like it's in real life, if you go out there and do things, you gain acquired knowledge and you improve yourself. So it's a
And
cool
like
way
in a
of looking
game.
at the mind, Jerome.
Yeah, and like in a game where you have to progress to different levels which grant you more XP. In life, you have to go places, you have to embark on new chapters of your life. You can't just stay at home for your whole life. Otherwise, you're just going to be on level 1 XP. That's all you're going to do. But if you, like in a game, you progress to new levels, in life you have to progress to new levels as well. So it's not just it's actually a far deeper analogy than it seems. Like it's properly living life like a game.
And that being willing to like go and experience new things is what you said. Like you can only grow to a certain extent when you're in your comfort zone, and being willing to push yourself
Yeah,
out your comfort zone and go to them places that make you feel a bit anxious or afraid or challenge you intellectually. That is where you're going to learn the most about yourself. It's where you're going to learn like, oh, I didn't perform well in this part. Oh, I felt anxious here. And it shows you where you're not free from your ego. It shows you where you are identified as this certain person, and it challenges that and allows for a death and a rebirth. But if you don't go to the places that make you feel uncomfortable, you never learn that about yourself. You just stay in a habit your whole life. You stay just on this
yeah.
perpetual state of habitual nature, not ever going out and challenging yourself.
You've heard of the concept of the hero's journey. The what's it? The hero with 1,000 faces. I believe that's the book which largely talks about it. The hero's journey and how nearly every single archetypable hero throughout history, and indeed fiction, has followed this pathway. As you start as a largely insignificant character, you live a mundane, normal life, and then a negative event happens, and a person or a thing or a trigger comes into your life, which allows you then to change and embark on the journey. but there's always a little bit of resistance at that beginning of the journey. You know, you need Gandalf or you need Obi-Wan Kenobi to come around and almost convince you. And I feel life is just like the same as well. Now, of course, we don't have these characters in it necessarily, but you do. Everyone starts, unless you're born into this, everyone starts as sort of like at a mundane, boring level. And then throughout your life, these events happen to you, which allow you to change as a person and embark on the next stage, like the hero would in every story that we are aware of. And then once they've
That's
embarked upon that quest, they have to fight the demon, and then they defeat it, and then that's the final chapter. You know, that is the hero's journey.
That's so true, Jerome, and like that's conceptualized by Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung,
Yeah,
where they
Joseph,
talk about
that
that
was
is
the author of
innately.
it. That was the author. Yeah, Hero of the Thousand
Yeah,
Faces. Good book. I read it.
it's
Yeah,
innately
good one.
it's innately built into us to want to go out and do that hero's journey, because that's how it's the adventure. It's the call to the adventure for life. Like that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to go out and experience life and figure out what's going on in our minds, overcome our neurosis, overcome the anxieties that hold us back. That is the whole point of being a human, and we've got that natural urge to go and do that. And that resistance to go and change, like you normally get enlightened to a bit of information, and there's a massive resistance to change. That resistance is the hardest part. The first, getting ready to start, if you can overcome that, then you're on your journey then. And then the compound effect kicks in and you start overcoming anxieties, you start building up confidence. But for most people, I see they get stuck at that initial resistance. Yeah, it's momentum, but they get stuck at that resistance. They get stuck there and they never push past that first barrier. But as soon as you push past that first barrier, you get your first bit of good feedback. And then that gives you momentum. It builds up the compound effect. And then you go again. And it's all these little wins that start snowballing. But you need to push past that first resistance.
How do you then? This is another question to you, mate, that I've been wondering for a while. Is that I often have the problem where I have one bit of success, and then I don't, and then I have another bit of success, and then I don't, and another bit of success, and I don't, and it's hard for me to get the ball rolling, if you get what I mean. Like, for example, like I do this, I do that, I meet all these amazing people, and I have such amazing fun. I feel great, and then I go back to a mundane life, and I do it all over again, and go back to a mundane life. Or I have some amazing bit of success, and then it's over, and then I have an amazing bit of success. It's like, how do you get yourself in a situation, because I feel this is what at least I'm searching for, but I think it's a lot of people, they're searching for this, is when you get yourself into a situation where success is just naturally allowed to snowball for you.
I think it's trusting the fact that failure is success, and going back to the mundane life and having the realization that that's not where you want to be. That in itself is success. So the way you're looking at success there is defined as the big win. But the big wins are made up of subcomponents of small wins.
Yeah.
And everything you do in your daily life is slowly building up to have that big win. So that big win's maybe the reward you get for all your hard work, but you wouldn't get that reward without going to the gym here, without speaking to that girl here, without overcoming that little anxiety here, without doing all these little things. You would never have the confidence to have that big win. So it's about trusting that your daily life, Jerome, everything you do in your life is overcoming little bits of your ego and allowing you to build up confidence, momentum. And so it's just the way you define success. I think if you flip it to saying, I've made it through a day, I've actually been to the gym, I've done this, I've done all these little habits, I maybe spoke to this person here, that is all success. It's just about the definition of the way you define success.
No, I like that. And I've been doing that. Funny you mention that. That's how I've been sort of viewing daily objectives of my day. I've been sort of doing it a little bit like that. You know, objective today is to go to the gym. Objective today is to talk to this random person, do this, do that, and it's like mission accomplished. Well done. 10 points of XP have been added to you. You've now leveled up your charisma stat. You've now leveled up your strength stat. Relating back to the video game aspect. It's funny, mate. Out of all the topics we've spoken about, they all seem to relate to each other, isn't it? Not one of these single things we've spoken about has been like a standalone thing. Like, okay, this is on its own path. Every single thing we've spoken about relates back to each other. And I just find that so interesting how all these topics related to self-improvement, no matter how you talk about one aspect, how you may communicate it differently to me or to this other person or to yourself, they all relate again. They all come back and it's the same truth. It's almost like there's an aspect of this which is the truth, so to speak. Now, don't view it like the truth, obviously, but there's something universal in this. And no matter the way in which you communicate it or the way in which it comes about, it is still that universal feeling that everybody's having.
It's because we're all exactly the same. We have this idea that we're like separate entities from each other, but we're all just
All
one. We're all
exactly the
just one.
same.
We are. We're all
No, we're
exactly the
not.
same in the way our minds operate, and
We're
we've
not
got these
NPCs,
egos
bro.
that
What are you on about?
so we've got these
No,
egos that
I get what you
separate
mean.
us
I get what you
from
mean. I just find that so funny.
yeah, we got these egos that separate us, thinking like I'm this person who is different to this person here, and that idea, that narrative of an ego that's Jerome, that idea of a narrative that is Alex Rogers, they are different. But at the core of that, behind the ego, everything is one. It's just the nature of reality, and the more we separate ourselves, the more we feel this disconnect. But when you truly embrace the fact that like that person over there is made up of the same things, the same atoms, deals with the same insecurities, the same anxieties, just in different framings, in different narratives. We all experience all human emotions. We all experience the same flow of reality. We've just got different narratives around it that we identify with. And I think when you can strip that back, you truly understand that, like, we are all the fucking same.
Yeah, it's so true, man. Like from speaking to people in my my peer groups from school, or just speaking to generally just people around, is that these feelings that you thought you that were unique to you growing up, the anxiety, the feelings which we all possess, which we think we're the center of the universe, so to speak, and that these feelings are unique solely to us. And when you speak to people, you realize that's complete lies. They're not. These are everyone's anxious, and but certain people, the ones who appear sort of not anxious, are simply better at controlling it. But everyone's got these anxieties.
I think even trying to hide the fact that you're not anxious is again just another way of deluding yourself from the fact that we're one. It's all just this. Everything I think now, and it's why we keep coming back to this. It's because everything is just an attachment to the ego. That's where all of our suffering comes from. Suffering wouldn't be there if we didn't. Pain would still be there. We'd still get the sensation of pain. Maybe the anxiety would still come. But the only reason that's suffering is because we attach a narrative to it, and everyone has their own narrative to their own problems. But when you realize that like the base sensations that we all get of anxiety, of depression, of whatever this is, it's all the same, and we're all exactly the same. And I think that's the way I define God as. I define God as this all oneness. Everything that's happening in reality is God. And I think if we looked at the definition of God in that way, that we're all the same, it's all just this universal flow that's happening, I think we would all be a lot more connected to each other.
Yeah. What do you think about this, Alex? That certain feelings, because I think we mentioned this earlier about the scale of vibration here, and feelings of guilt and shame are the lowest vibration, and things like pride or courage, I believe, is vibrating on an incredibly high level. Why do you think feelings like suffering and pain, despite the fact these are negative feelings, for some reason they vibrate on a much higher level? Like you can still be in immense pain and suffering, but if you're not, but you're still vibrating, it seems, on a higher level than a person who is happy and anxious. You get what I mean? Like you could be like, for example, your mother might have died on the Titanic, and you're like out there on a bit of wood floating in the Atlantic. You are miserable as hell, but there's something different fundamentally to you, because even though your life situation absolutely sucks at this moment, you still feel like an immense sense of pride that you've survived, and you're living dangerously almost, and you've achieved something, and every moment you're taking not for granted because you're alive. But feelings like anxiety and depression, these are like low feelings. These are like genuinely the worst feelings in the world. Even if you are physically fine, mentally, you got friends around you. These feelings, feel so much worse than a guy fucking crawling through the Amazon rainforest, with half a leg, but at least he's alive because he survived the plane crash. Now, I know they're not comparable, but there's like a fundamental psychological difference, I feel, between these two types of feelings. You genuinely feel you are vibrating on a far higher frequency with pain and suffering than you are with anxiety and depression.
I think again it just comes to the narrative we're boxing around that certain feeling. So like when you said that person who's just survived, they're in their mind, they are overwhelmed with gratitude because of the fact that they could have been dead 1 second ago. Whereas that person with anxiety is just reinforcing the fact that I'm socially anxious, I don't have friends, I don't have people. So they're telling themselves a different narrative around that sensation. Whereas like, so anxiety really is just it's a framing issue. Like the physiological effects of excitement and anxiety are exactly the same. You get the increased heart rate, the tingly sensation, but one's just telling yourself a good story about it and one's telling yourself a bad story about it. So it's always a way of perceiving things. Life is all we do is perception. Our perception shapes our reality. That's it. That's the way I kind of see it. I think that if you're in a negative state of mind, you're just believing in a narrative that is negative, and you can just flip it on its head and look for the meaning of that suffering. That suffering that you're dealing with can be turned into something productive. You just need to be able to step outside of your narrative and create a new one.
I love that. It's all narrative in the end of the day. I've never looked at it like that, but it really is. Anxiety and excitement are very similar. It's the same physical response largely, but one's negative and one's positive, all because of the narrative that you've described to it.
Yeah, and it's trying to not identify with a narrative that anxiety is a bad thing, because you've been in this state of attaching to that narrative for so long that anxiety is now part of you. You've identified with that. But it's that thing we came back having humility. It's being willing to step aside and realizing that's my faulty perception of what anxiety is. I don't need to look at anxiety as, oh, I've been rejected by loads of women in the past, so now I'm going to have anxiety around them. I can look at it in the fact that, right, I'm actually now excited to go and speak to that woman. I'm going to overcome some fears. I'm going to build some skills. And that little perception change then gives a different meaning to that anxiety. It's still the same anxiety. It's just got a different narrative around it, a different meaning.
So true, man. So true.
It's hard to do, Jerome, though. It's not an easy thing to do. Like, if it was that easy, I would just create a new narrative and I would just go there and boss the world.
Of course, it's easier said than done. A lot of these things always are, man. They're always easier said than done. But the point is, it's still true. At least I agree with you as far as what you're saying about anxiety. It's just a perception switch. I just yeah, Alex. Genuinely, you can cut this bit out, but I need to shoot off in a bit because I've got work in like an hour and a half. But
shit, we can end it now if you want, Jerome. I think that was a pretty fucking good way to end the conversation. Yeah.
So I didn't want to end the conversation so abruptly. That's the thing. I was hoping it would flow a little bit better, but generally it's been I've really learned a lot actually. Like I wasn't expecting to have an hour and a half conversation. I thought it'd be more like half an hour, but it just generally just topic just flowed, and it was wonderful, man. And I really enjoyed doing that with you, mate.
Jerome, that was actually a really fucking good conversation, mate. You never know what to expect before going into it. Obviously, we had a little bit of an exchange at the mastermind, but mate, that was a fucking good conversation, lad. It's interesting how you have these and it all flows. You learn a lot from it. I learned a lot from that, and I hope you did. So yeah, it's really cool to have these conversations, mate.
I never looked genuinely. I never seen anxiety. I've spoken like it with you. I've addressed anxiety a lot before, more I've spoken about, but I've never viewed it as simply just a perception switch from excitement. Like that, I actually was like, wow, that actually was like, clogs started moving in my head there. Like, okay, that's kind of the same thing. and it's like, whoa, what? But no, I didn't know what to expect because I only met you actually once before, and that was at the mastermind last month. So, genuinely, man, I've been following your content. You've been following mine, and I was very happy to do this with you, man. Like, as I complimented you at the beginning, and I'll do again. Like, I feel a great sense of connection with your message, and I feel that me and you are actually very similar in our origins and what we preach.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jerome. And honestly, mate, as I said before, I thought it was admirable how charismatic you were, and that's why I wanted to do the conversation. So I think we should do this in the future, mate. I think we've got a lot more to come from doing content with each other.
I agree, man. I agree. Well, and me and a few others, mate, we're heading out to Thailand in October, mate, for a few months. So I don't mind doing a little bit of content there. That'd be sick.
Yeah, mate. I've come back from Thailand. I was in Thailand a couple months ago training Muay Thai. You're gonna love it out there, Jerome. It's amazing, mate.
You did that. I did. Yeah. This was the second time for me, man. I thought you'd been to Thailand before. You give up. Yeah, second time. I went last year as well.
Did you go out there to train Muay Thai?
Yeah. Yeah. Great sport, man.
Yeah, that's the reason. Right, Jerome, I'm going to end the podcast anyway. I appreciate you coming on, dude.